Now in this session we have three young scholars. All of them are PhD students as far as I see. I start with David Leupold. He's a PhD student at Humboldt University, Germany. And he's trying to understand and explore the memory of collective violence, multi-collectivity in the extended Van area, Vilayet of Van and Bitlis. He did a field work in Lake Van area, and he conducted 112 biographical narrative interviews with the individuals. That includes Armenians, Syriacs, Yazidis. And adding those testimonies together, I'm sure he's going to provide an excellent narrative, excellent academic narrative at the end. David, you have 20 minutes.
I see. Is it working? Yeah. Yeah? I think it was working, yeah. Okay. Նախքան ուզում եմ ասել, որ շատ ուրախ եմ, որ մենք բոլորին կարող ենք ստես լինել։ Կարծում եմ, որ եթե մենք կարող ենք հոս լինել, այսինքն հույս էլ հոս։ Լավ, շնորհակալություն։ Dear fellow colleagues and guests, after years of research in both Turkey and in Armenia, it is a pleasure and honor to speak today upon the invitation of the Hrant Dink Foundation here in Istanbul. In the following few minutes, I will seek to unveil what I call bridging memories across a contested geography. With its substantial Armenian populations in the past, its majority Kurdish populations in the present, and its territorial configuration as part of Eastern Turkey, I identify the region at the nexus of a contested geography. My work is rooted in a one-year fieldwork which I conducted both in Armenia and in Turkey. I conducted over 100 in-depth interviews, collecting audio material over 60 hours. In face of the present time constraints, this talk will only allow us to catch with only a brief glimpse on this topic. At first, I will provide more an ethnographic overview about the multi-religious demography. And based on this, I will retrace migratory trajectories in the aftermath of the 1915-1916 genocide from their homes in Bashkale, Gevash, or Bakhchishir, Moks, to the mountains of Aragat, Soten, or the plainlands of Armavir. As relatively little research has been done, as Ayhan has pointed out already in the previous session on Yazidi communities, I will attach particular importance to the Yazidi tribe Ela Zukuriye, who populated the plainlands between Van and Saray. In the second part of my talk, I will lend a voice to both the mainly Kurdish populations that inhabitate the region nowadays, as well as the descendants of all those who were expelled a century ago, Armenians, Syriacs, as well as Yazidis. Hereby, one question will be of paramount importance to me, claimed as home by both those who reside today, as well as those who were expelled a century ago. How is the existence of the other in one's home recognized or denied? Just to give a very brief overview about relevant sources for the reconstruction of the ethnography, the demographic structure, there exist various Armenian sources such as the Toponymic Dictionary of Armenia and its neighboring regions, Հայաստան եւ Փարագից շրջանները տեղանունները բարարան, or the Illustrated Geonatural Dictionary, Պատկերազարդ բնաշխարհիկ բարարան, comprehensively document both urban and rural settlements of Armenians, including also the Lake Van region. The rural settlement areas of Yazidis are documented in quite limited works, such as by Omar Hali in 2008 and also Murazid 2015, the second one published in Armenian in Yerevan. But there's also more detailed information on the clan structure of Yazidis in the first-hand observations of Orientalists, like for example the German Orientalist Otto Blau, in his well-received essay News on Northern Kurdish Tribes, or Nachrichten über nordkurdische Stämme in German, from the second half of the 19th century. However, a major challenge is, of course, to identify the current location of former Armenian, Syriac, and Yazidi settlements, as authors like Sevan Nishanyan in works like Hayali Chuarafyalar have shown large-scale policies of renaming altered the entire geography of Turkey, particularly Eastern Turkey. In this regard, particular actually internal publications in Turkish by the Public Office for Cartography from the 1950s and 1960s, which lists the old and new names of villages. Cities and provinces provide crucial sources. For me, particularly, then the source of Van Vilayeti, published in 1959, is very relevant. I will not go further into reconstructing the demographic situation of Armenians and Syriacs from the region, as we will have two, I think, excellent presentations by Nicholas Algilou and also Suave Aydin later on this topic. But let me point out something with regard to the Yazidis. Yazidis are represented in the Van province mainly by the tribe El Azukuriya, as researchers like Omar Khali have pointed out, on the plainland of Dasht Abaka between Van city and the Iranian-Turkish border town Saray. The highest concentration of Yazidi villages was found east of Lake Van in Özalp, or as was formerly known Tashrumi, along the riverbank of the Avaresh River, the Black River, and around Pir Reshid Mountain, rock formation south of Lake Süphan. This core settlement area comprises villages like Shemshettin, Akçagül, or how it's also known Derjemeda, Gündüzler, or it's also known Kanizark, Haji Eli, Aksaguç, or Velecan, Yarımkaya, Çırak, and most famously Çubuklu, which is the home village of the Yazidi national war hero Cihangir Aga from the house of Hatip Aga. Further contemporary villages with former Yazidi populations can be found in Muradiye Çaldıran, Gevash, and the vicinity of the Hoshap Castle. And now, more difficult than localizing these former Armenian, Syriac, and Yazidi villages in Lake Van is to reconstruct the trajectories of these populations in the aftermath of the genocide. Due to the scarcity of quantitative works on the exact whereabouts of refugees, so lists who would list where exactly these refugees would come from when they settled to what would then become post Soviet and Soviet Georgia, Soviet Armenia. Unions of compatriots, Hayranakzagan Mutsuner, in Armenian, are a kind of first important starting point to reconstruct actually also the trajectories of these communities, as also Richard Hovhannisyan has pointed out with regard to the diaspora experience, but the same thing is of course also true with regard to Soviet Armenia. In the case of Yazidis, as I've already hinted on before, clan structures somehow facilitate the location of Yazidis. For instance, the El Azukuriya tribe and its subtribes were prior to 1916 almost exclusively, with some also tribal presence in Bayezid, found mainly in the Lake Van area. So when we look towards Van Yazidis after 1915, Yazidis from the El Azukuri tribe are nowadays mainly found in the villages of the Armavir and Aragatsutun province, where I also conducted my field work. In the Armavir province, where almost half of the Yazidi population resides, descendants from the Vilayet of Van can be found, according to also my fieldwork, in Bambakashat or Melabazit, Pshatavan or Iktalu, Zartonk, or how it's known also Khemishlu, Artashar, Tarunik or Malajeva, and Kulubekli. In Aragatsun province, Van Yazidis can be found in Kaleshbek, Zorik or Zorba, Ganj, or how it's also known Galto, Artashavan, Ilanchalan, and Gazaravan. The list is complemented by settlements also in Proshian and Norgeri, located in the vicinity of Yerevan. Van Syriacs after 1915, to keep that very short, because again I think we will have more detailed discussions on that. Of those who reside in Armenia, the vast majority are Syriacs who fled to Soviet Armenia after genocidal killings in Urumia in Iran. So, but I was able to conduct 2 interviews with Syriacs also from Van Gandalova in the suburb of Kukya, east of Tbilisi. Now, in the remaining minutes I would now like to single out one particular aspect I focused on throughout my research, which goes through my research like kind of red thread, we could say. It is the question of the homeland as the home of the other, the key to bridging accounts, in my opinion. Do accounts of individuals from the Lake Van region and Armenia actually overcome the national boundaries, both physically existing, with as reflected in the territorial configuration of Eastern Turkey, but also the imagined borders of Western Armenia or Bakuri Kurdistan? A key to understanding this puzzle is to look whether the presence of the other is recognized or silenced in these accounts. Let me first now approach the topic of Van as seen from Van, and voices from the Kurdish populated Turkey. The topic of home as the home of the other is highly sensitive. In the account, of, for example, of a peasant from Bilgeç or Kaniresh village in Van Başkale, the fear is voiced that the expelled former owner might one day return to reclaim his land. I quote, "My father told me that when he was 4 or 5 years old, some fella, so the non-Muslim, came to Kaniresh and said, 'This place is ours. Get away from here.' Yes, our deceased father used to tell us this story, that the infidel came and told us to leave." End quote. In this mystified account, the expropriated former owner reappears to haunt the life of nowadays residents. I think it is a fascinating insight into how silencing history plays a crucial role in safeguarding the present-day ownership status. But in contrast to this, in Güzel Konak village, or how it is remembered by its mainly Kurdish residents nowadays, Pshevank, most probably Armenian, as we can see, still known with its Armenian name, owned land is still associated with its former proprietors. I quote again, "The field of our region are still remembered by their Armenian names, Takur, Zvart, Zeyro Pasha. These names are Armenian, and since these lands were taken from the Armenians, they are remembered that way." End quote. In the context of non-formalized traditional ownership structures, naming enshrined the claim to territory. A similar observation was done in Çubuklu. I actually was mentioning that village briefly as the home of Cihangir Agha, a village east of Lake Van with a high Yazidi population before 1915. I quote actually from a peasant from that village whom I interviewed. He said, "The real owner of that village is Hatip Agha, the former Yazidi tribal, actually feudal lord of that village. His son Cihangir Agha left for Armenia." End quote. In the Hakkari region, to the southeast of Van city, I encountered another interesting feature of memory. The umbrella term, fella, non-Muslim in Kurdish, and Ermeni in Turkish were earnestly used as synonyms. So I also lost my concentration again. So the term fella, which is actually kind of umbrella term comprising all non-Muslims, is mainly used in Kurdish to refer to the other, the non-Muslim other. The interesting thing is that when actually respondents would give accounts, provide accounts in Turkish, they would erroneously translate that word fella directly to Ermeni, which then creates actually a kind of confusion. As a result of this, most of the respondents I interviewed in Hakkari were actually of the conviction that Armenians mainly populated the areas around Cilu, around Stazin, and were not aware that they were actually Nestorian Syriacs, which were bound to Kuchanis, not to the Armenian Patriarch. But now let's discuss in the remaining 8 minutes the other side. Van as seen from Yerevan and the voices I compiled from Armenia. Again, of course, also in a very fragmentary way, just singling out some aspects. In Armenia, of course, we notice stark difference. A difference between those who have traveled to the region and those who did not. The first group would often stress the natural beauty, material wealth, and prosperous life in the lost homeland, most famously expressed with the term Yekinkum Paradis or Yekirum Van, as we've already heard, paradise in heaven and Van on earth. Van, idealized as a paradise-like place with gardens full of artisanate apples and the lake Van full of tarek fish. Or as a Syriac woman from Gandalava called it in an interview conducted in Russian, nest of gold, Gniezdo Izolata. However, we make a striking observation. While there exists a detailed account on family life in the pre-1915 period, we find almost no reference to the cohabitation of Muslims and non-Muslims. At least that's true for most of the interviews I conducted. While I continued with my interviews, I realized that memory did not only disregard the Muslim other, it generally lacked much reference to public life beyond the confines of the family. And I have actually a quote that somehow gives first kind of insight to revealing that riddle. And a female participant in Yerevan said, I quote, "I can tell something about their close relatives, but I do not remember anything about their friends. My grandmother's sister did not have so much access to family friends. It was a very conservative family, end quote. And I think this utterance highlights an aspect crucial to the understanding of memory transmission and also the question of who were the memory carriers in the Armenian context, with the vast majority of genocide survivors being either infants or women with restricted or virtually no access to public life. Memory on the homeland meant in many accounts of Armenians virtually memory on one's respective home. And now in the few remaining minutes, let me just touch upon a topic we can more develop maybe in the discussion, the question of the myth of return and the return. When a sense of belonging is expressed towards a physically existing yet distant place, the question of reunion with that place inevitably emerges. While nearly impossible during the Soviet period, there is nowadays at least no legal bureaucratic obstacle for Armenian citizens to travel to the region. However, may it be due to economic hardship, lack of opportunity, or simply fear, the vast majority of my respondents did never visit again the Lake Van region. Of those who did, they found the city of Van, whose face had been irrevocably altered by war, destruction, and urban change, I think best expressed with the words of Yektan and the urban side of a city. However, there are also accounts like one from a family from Van, whose relatives visited the city, and they were even, according to their account, able to locate their former house in Aigestan. So in spite of differences, a common characteristic was that traveling to Lake Van was first mainly understood as a quest for a lost past. Yet instead of finding a lost Armenian homeland, visitors from Armenia were confronted with a different reality, a region which has been populated by a Kurdish majority population now for a century. In practical terms, this brings along also a language barrier, of course, between current Kurdish populations and descendants of former populations. In the absence of a common language, so I'm mainly referring now to Armenians who traveled from the Caucasus to the region. I think this is not so much true for Armenians who, for example, still do speak Turkish or Kurdish, who live, for example, in the near diaspora in Syria or Lebanon. But in the absence of a common language, personal interaction between visitors from Armenia and the local population remained often superficial, according to their accounts. Yet some respondents, such as a peasant from the Ashnak village in Aragatsotin province, recounted actually in engaging in non-verbal forms of interaction, when they, for example, joined the halay, the Govent round dance with Kurds at a local street festival in Van. Summing up, and to open then later on the discussion, I would say that beyond all these differences, what accounts both from Turkey and Armenia had in common was that tendency to oscillate between the propaganda notion of a homogeneously populated national soil and the actual historical reality of a culturally diverse geography. Against the totalizing claim of competing national histories, which I actually also explore in my research, I employed a more anthropological approach and turned to the contested area itself to analyze the accounts of both currently residing, so mainly Sunni and Alevi Kurds alongside with Arabs and Turks, and expelled populations, the Armenians, Syriacs, and Yazidi Kurds, and relying on a biographical narrative analysis. While approaching the violent history of the Lake Van region from both within and without present-day Armenia, I encountered a history of collective violence. A history of collective violence that I think, if generally shared, may overcome the divide that runs between the descendants of those who stayed and those who were forcibly removed 101 years ago. Hığutyun.